Welcome to Julia for Talented Amateurs, where I make wholesome Julia tutorials for talented amateurs everywhere. I'm your host, the Dabbling Doggo.
I dabble.
Last week, we learned how to render beautiful math equations for the web by using TeX and Katek. Last week's tutorial marked the end of the non-Julia portion of this tutorial series. Up to this point, we've learned HTML, CSS, JavaScript, regex, Markdown, TeX, and Katek. You're probably wondering when all of this knowledge is going to pay off. All of this knowledge will begin to pay off starting today. Today, we'll get an introduction to the Franklin package, which is a static site generator written in Julia. By using Franklin, we'll be able to get a very sophisticated website up and running quickly. And best of all, we'll be able to display and evaluate Julia code on our website. By the end of this tutorial, you'll know what a static site generator is. You'll also know how to install Franklin and how to create your own custom website. And finally, you'll know how to deploy your new website onto GitHub Pages by using GitHub Desktop. Knowledge of Julia, HTML, CSS, Markdown, and TeX/Katek is required for this tutorial. As a Julia user, you're going to be amazed at what you can do by using Franklin. Okay, let's get started. Before we get to Franklin, let's back up and go through a brief history of web development. When Tim Berners-Lee invented the World Wide Web in 1990, his initial website was a static website, meaning that the web pages that a visitor to his website saw in their browser were exactly what was stored on his web server. That's because the files that were stored on his web server were the exact HTML code that he had personally written. In the early days of the web, all websites were static websites filled with static web pages. Some of the advantages of hosting a static website are that they are fast, cheap, and secure. Some of the disadvantages of hosting a static website are that they do not allow for a custom user experience, are not very user-friendly for web developers, and are not scalable. As the web development industry matured, and as websites grew in size and complexity, dynamic websites started to emerge as an alternative to static websites. Under this web architecture, individual web pages are not stored as hard-coded HTML files on the web server. Instead, web pages are generated on demand by either an application hosted on the web server or by a scripting language that manipulates the document object model in the visitor's web browser. Some of the advantages of hosting a dynamic website are they allow for a highly customized user experience, are very user-friendly for web developers, and are scalable. While this may sound like dynamic websites fixed all of the problems with static websites, dynamic websites came with their own set of challenges. Some of the disadvantages of hosting a dynamic website are that they are slow, expensive to maintain, and vulnerable to security attacks. In order to address these issues, there's been an increase in the use of something called static site generators, or SSGs, in the past few years. SSGs fall somewhere in between static websites and dynamic websites. They offer some of the benefits of static websites while also including some of the benefits of dynamic websites. Some of the advantages of using an SSG are that the websites that they generate are fast, cheap, and secure. While using an SSG is more user-friendly than hard-coding HTML, it's not as user-friendly as some dynamic website applications. Also, while websites generated by SSG are more scalable than a hard-coded HTML static website, they're not as scalable as dynamic websites. Finally, at the end of the day, websites generated by an SSG is a static website, so they won't be able to offer a highly customizable user experience. With that said, using an SSG is ideal for smaller, personal projects that don't need all of the bells and whistles of a dynamic website. A website created using an SSG will be fast, scalable, and secure, while potentially being free to build, deploy, and maintain. In other words, it's perfect for a hobbyist and amateur like myself. Some examples of SSGs written in JavaScript include Next.js and Gatsby. But SSGs don't need to be written in JavaScript. They can be written in any language. Hugo is an SSG written in Go, and Jekyll is an SSG written in Ruby. Franklin is an SSG written in Julia, and that's what we'll be using today. Franklin was created by Thibault Leinart. I had assumed that Franklin was created by a professional web developer, but like a lot of other Julia packages, Franklin was created by a highly motivated and exceptionally gifted individual who created it as a side project, which, for me, makes it even more impressive. Let's fire up VS Code and take a look at what this Franklin package is all about. If you haven't done so already, install Julia and install the Julia extension for VS Code. As of this recording, the latest version of Julia is version 1.6.1. I'm assuming that you already know how to do this, so I won't be covering any of the Julia installation or setup process in this tutorial. In VS Code, hit Alt-J, then Alt-O to start the Julia REPL in the terminal panel. Maximize the terminal panel. Make a new directory called tutorial03/09 by using the make directory function. Change your present working directory to your new directory by using the change directory function. Enter the package REPL by hitting the closing square bracket. Activate your new directory by typing in activate space period, and then hit enter. Add the Franklin package. As of this recording, the latest version of Franklin is version 0.10.41. Type in status to confirm that you have installed the latest version. Exit the package REPL by hitting backspace. In the REPL, type in using Franklin. Now you can have Franklin generate a static website framework automatically by using the newSite function. The newSite function takes two arguments. The first argument is the name of your website project folder. It'll also be the name of your GitHub repository, so select a name that you feel comfortable with using in your GitHub account. The second argument is a keyword argument for the name of the styling template that you want to use in your website. The Franklin documentation provides a list of templates that you can choose. For this tutorial, I'll be using the Sandbox template, since it's a simple, one-page layout that's a perfect environment for us to learn how to use Franklin. Once you hit enter, Franklin will automatically create a new directory and create over 100 files and folders to house your new website. Open the Explorer panel and take a look at what Franklin has created. Keep the Explorer panel open. Back in the REPL, you can use the serve function to start Franklin's own live server. Pretty cool, right? Basically, anything you see here can be modified to suit your needs. This is just a template. Now, dock your live server to the right of VS Code. The way Franklin works is that you can make any changes you want in this Markdown file, and Franklin will automatically convert it into HTML when you save your file. Franklin has its own flavor of an enhanced Markdown. If you look at the Explorer panel, you should see a folder called Site preceded by 2 underscore characters. That folder contains your actual website. If you open that folder, you should see an index.html file. This index.html file is being automatically generated by Franklin, so you should not make any modifications to it. Instead, make all of your modifications to the index.md file. Close the index.html file and go back to the index.md file. Comment out all of that content starting on line 6. You don't need to delete it. You may want to refer back to it later, so just comment it out for now. But keep the first 3 lines. Save your index.md file and look at what happens. All of the content should have disappeared from the live server. Now, take a look at the index.html file. All of the content should have disappeared from that file as well. Close the index.html file and go back to the index.md file. At the very top of the Markdown file are 3 lines that start with @def. @def is the syntax for a page variable. Defining a page variable will allow you to use that variable name in other parts of your website. For now, change the value of the page variable named title into whatever you like. I'm going with something simple, like My Franklin Sandbox. After saving your file, notice that the title in your document changed in the Browser tab. Also notice that the title element has updated automatically in the index.html file. For the most part, the rest of the syntax used in this Markdown file is the same syntax that we've used in other Markdown files that we've seen before in other tutorials. Let's start by adding some headers to our documents, which will serve as an outline for the rest of this tutorial. Save your file. Notice that your live server updated automatically. Look at your index.html file and notice that it updated automatically as well. You get the idea. Now that we know how this is working, I won't be going back and forth to the index.html page. Now, scroll up to the top of the Markdown file, and let's start going through this list. I'll be saving my file as we make changes. We've already updated the title, so let's move on to updating the config.md file. In the Explorer panel, double-click on the config.md file to open it. This file contains some global information for your website. This is where you change the author name. You also need to add something here in order to get this website to work on GitHub Pages. You need to define a variable named prepath and assign it to the name of your top-level folder. In my case, it's MySite11. This information is for GitHub. After you save the config.md file, scroll down to the bottom of your live server. The footer should have updated with your new author name. The text for the footer is contained in a different file. Open the _layout folder and double-click on the page_foot.html file. All of those curly brackets are for page variables. You can modify this file however you like, and then save the file to see your changes. The variable named fd_mtime shows the time of last modification for the Markdown file, and it's based on the Greenwich Mean Time, not your local time zone. You can change the date format to the ISO 8601 format by using fd_mtime_raw. Now, let's go back to our index.md file and create a table of contents. You can have Franklin automatically generate a table of contents for you by using \toc. These are clickable links, and Franklin is basing this off your headers. So far, it's not much of a website yet, but it does give us an idea of how this process works. We'll be updating our content in the Markdown files, and Franklin will convert that content into HTML. Before we get too far, let's take a break here and learn how to deploy this website onto GitHub Pages by using something called GitHub Desktop. In the past tutorials, we've been uploading HTML, CSS, and JavaScript files directly to our GitHub repository. While that may work with a small number of files, It won't work with over 100 files in multiple folders. For that, we'll need something more sophisticated. In order to get our Franklin website onto GitHub, we'll be using GitHub Desktop, which is a free desktop app created by GitHub that provides a user-friendly way to manage your GitHub repositories. Go to desktop.github.com, which is a different website, by the way, than the primary github.com. Download GitHub Desktop for your operating system and install it. At the prompt, sign in using your GitHub account credentials. This is a little confusing because this login is for the GitHub Desktop app to gain access to your GitHub account. In order to log in to your actual GitHub account, you'll still need to log in separately at github.com using your browser. After you log in to GitHub Desktop, the user interface should open up. You can adjust the size of the interface by using Ctrl+ or minus. What we want to do is use our website project folder as a new GitHub repository. This will allow us to do two things. One, it will get all of the files into a GitHub repository. And two, it will allow us to continue making updates to our file locally and then update the files in our GitHub repository after we're done making changes. Drag and drop your website folder onto that Pro Tip button. In my case, my website folder is called My Site 11. A dialog box should open up. Click on the link to create a repository. At the next dialog box, click on the Create Repository button. Next, click on the Publish Repository button. When the dialog box pops up, you can decide whether or not you want to keep this code private. I'm going to make mine public, but you may want to keep it private if this is going to be your personal website. Okay, so what just happened? You can't really tell by looking at the GitHub Desktop user interface. In your browser, go to github.com. It should automatically log you into your GitHub account, but if it doesn't, log into your account. You should now see a new repository called My Site 11 with all of your files. Go to Settings and click on Pages. Under Source, select GH-Pages and save. If you don't see GH-Pages, wait a few minutes and refresh the page. This will take a few minutes to generate since there's so many files. After a few minutes, click on the link to go to your new website. If your website looks like this, congratulations! You have successfully deployed your first SSG website. Now, let's go back to VS Code and add some examples to our website. In VS Code, let's add some placeholder text. I don't know how to generate lorem ipsum text using Markdown, so I'm going to use this Lipsum generator website. It doesn't matter what you use here, it's just placeholder text to see how it renders in HTML. So, no surprises here. Under the Math Equations section, I'm going to copy and paste some examples from the last tutorial. Franklin uses Kotek to render math equations, so the math equations should look identical to the ones from the last tutorial. So, they do indeed look identical. You can use all of the syntax that we learned in the last tutorial in Franklin. This template numbers the math equations by default. If you would like to disable this numbering, you can do so by changing the CSS file. In the Explorer panel, open the _CSS folder and double-click on the franklin.css file. This file contains all of the styling rules for this particular sandbox template. For the math equation's numbers, search for context-display. When searching, make sure to disable the regular expression and match case options. The styling rules for the math equation's numbering is found under the class selector called .context-display: after. To disable it, simply comment it out. Don't delete it, since you may want to enable it sometime in the future. Now, save the CSS file. The numbering should have disappeared from the live server view. I'm going to leave it in, but feel free to play with the CSS rules to suit your needs. So far, we've seen all of this before in other tutorials. Using Markdown to generate HTML files is nothing new, and we can do it ourselves without using Franklin. This next part we've never been able to do before, so this is a reason to consider using Franklin. Not only can you use Franklin to display blocks of Julia code, Franklin will actually evaluate your Julia code and display the output. Adding ::example11 to the end of Julia tells Franklin to get Julia to evaluate the code in the code block and to save the output in a file named ex11. Using \show and :example11 inside curly brackets will display the output. After saving your Markdown file, take a look at the index.html file. I'm not sure how Franklin is working under the hood here, but Franklin is actually converting the Julia output into HTML, which is amazing. Let's take a look at some more examples. So it works for basic math as well. This may not seem that exciting, but check this out. Save your Markdown file and take a look at your index.html file. I don't think that I can properly express how amazing that I think this is. Franklin is calling a Julia function that we created from within our Markdown file and is grabbing the output and then converting the Julia output into HTML. Hopefully, you're beginning to see the possibilities of using Franklin. Your Julia code is no longer confined to your local machine. You can now use Franklin to share your code with the world, and Franklin will not only display it, but it will evaluate it as well and display the output for you. Let's end this section with a fun example. As you can see, the output is not limited to simple displays. Franklin actually displays the entire matrix. This next section is also pretty amazing. If you watch my tutorial on how to convert a CSV file into a web table using JavaScript, you know how difficult it can be just by using vanilla JavaScript. Watch how easy it is to create an HTML table using Franklin. For this next example, I'm using the population by year.csv file that I used in an earlier tutorial. You don't have to use this file. You can use any CSV file. If you would like to use my file, I'll leave a link to it in the description below. In your My Site 11 folder, you should see a folder named Assets. In the Assets folder, create a new folder named Index. In that index folder, create another folder named Table Input. Save your CSV file in that Table Input folder that you just created. After saving your CSV file, go back to the Markdown file and let's add the syntax to generate a table. Save your file, and just like that, your HTML table appears. \table input generates a table using the default styling provided by the template that you have selected. There are two sets of curly brackets. The first set of curly brackets is to add a header manually if your CSV file doesn't contain a header row. If your CSV file does contain a header row, then you can leave the first set of curly brackets empty, but be sure to include the empty curly brackets. The second set of curly brackets is for the path of where your CSV file is located. Simple, right? Notice that Franklin has automatically copied your new file and folders to your __ site folder. Take a look at the index.html file. As you can see, all of the table headers and table data have been converted into the appropriate HTML elements. Now, you can modify the default styling however you like. I'm going to modify this table to emulate that prettytables.jl look by adding some styling rules to the franklin.css file. Nice, right? Now, going back to the Markdown file, the last bit of Markdown is interesting. Notice in the live server that the source line is pretty big. If you want to create some custom styling, you use the @ syntax to create a div element with a class name. In this case, I wrapped the string source:\wikipedia inside div tags and created a class named source. Now I can go back to the CSS file and add a styling rule for my new class. After saving my file, the source line should appear smaller and in italics. Pretty cool, right? For this next example, I'm going to be using an SVG image that I created in a previous tutorial on using Gadfly. I'll leave a link to it in the description below if you'd like to use it. Otherwise, feel free to use your own image file. Save your image file in the Assets folder inside the My Site 11 folder. Now, let's add the syntax to add an image. This syntax is the same syntax that we saw in a previous tutorial on how to insert an image using Markdown. You can also add a clickable link to a YouTube video by using the thumbnail image for that YouTube video. YouTube stores the thumbnail image at img.youtube.com/vi/thevideoid/0.jpg. You can find the video ID by looking at the URL for that YouTube video. It's that string followed by v equals. You can get a shortened version of the URL by right-clicking on the video itself. Clicking on this thumbnail will take you away from your site and onto the YouTube site. If you prefer that the user stay on your site to watch the video, you can embed a YouTube video inside your website by injecting HTML code into your Markdown file by using a set of triple tildes. You can find the embed code for a YouTube video by right-clicking on that video. Now, this embedded video looks too big for my site, so I'm going to adjust the settings of the iframe. Okay, so that's a little better. So, we're probably not going to win any design awards for this website, but it's a great start, and we were able to get it up and running pretty quickly. After you get comfortable working with the sandbox template, you can try building a more complicated website with multiple pages based on one of the other templates. For now, let's update our website on GitHub to include all of our recent changes. Go back to your GitHub desktop interface. It should be telling you that it has detected a bunch of changes. Add a brief summary description of the changes and commit the changes. Now, push those committed changes up to GitHub. Yes, this is a two-step process. You need to commit the changes first, and then you need to push the changes to your GitHub repository as a separate step. If you go back to your GitHub repository, you'll see that all of your files have been updated. Now we wait. Although updating the files is very quick, it does take a few minutes for those changes to update in the actual website.
A few moments later.
After a few minutes, refresh your website. Not the live server view, but the actual GitHub website on the internet.
Two hours later.
If your website looks like this, then congratulations again. Not only have you successfully used a static site generator to create a website, you have successfully deployed and updated that website using GitHub Desktop and GitHub Pages. So let's take a few moments to reflect on what just happened in this tutorial. Today, we began putting a lot of pieces together. By combining our knowledge of Julia, HTML, CSS, Markdown, Tech, and Kotek, we were able to use a static site generator called Franklin that is written in Julia to create a static website. So now you can see why I spent so much time covering all of these non-Julia subjects earlier in this tutorial series. The basics of using Franklin are pretty straightforward, but in order to use Franklin, you need to know all of these other subjects. This static website is no ordinary website. It contains blocks of Julia code that were created in a Markdown file and then evaluated by Julia, with the Julia output then being converted into HTML and displayed by Franklin. Despite it being a fairly sophisticated website, this site cost us nothing to build, cost us nothing to deploy, and it will cost us nothing to maintain. Before you log out of GitHub, please be sure to go to the GitHub page for the Franklin package and give it a star, as a way of saying thank you to the package author and to all of the contributors for providing us with such an awesome package for free. Thank you very much. Alright, talented amateurs, that's all for today. If you made it this far, congratulations! Today, we learned how to use the Franklin package to generate and deploy a Julia-centric static website. Next week, we'll get an introduction to the Genie package, which labels itself as the highly productive Julia Web Framework. If you enjoyed this video and you feel like you learned something new, please give it a thumbs up. For more wholesome Julia tutorials, please be sure to subscribe and hit that bell New tutorials are posted on Sundays/Mondays. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.